I'll go back to the Wendy's days. Fast food in general was seen as a bit of the enemy. We got to differentiate by challenging the industry. And we did that through social. This is going back to the where's the beef days, challenging Burger King because they were freezing burger patties instead of bringing in fresh beef. McDonald's from the commoditization that they created in fast food. And that led to the snarky personality of Wendy's. We got in fights with other brands on Twitter every day. Knock down, drag out fights, challenging everyone to do better.
Hey there, Lead the Team Nation. Welcome back to another great episode. Today I have for you Brandon Rhoten, who is the Chief Marketing Officer at GroundTruth. He's known for helping brands that need traffic to grow again. He previously served as Chief Marketing Officer of Papa John's International and Potbelly Sandwich Works, which you know. And in those places, he built the digital and social teams and ran advertising also for Wendy's for years, helping all three brands grow again, including racking up over 13 years of growth with Wendy's. Now he's joined GroundTruth as CMO to help other retailers and restaurants grow their businesses as well. And if you're not familiar with GroundTruth, they are a media platform that drives in-store visits and other real business results. Brandon, welcome to Lead the Team.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
So let's dive in here. Rumor has it that you always post on LinkedIn, go, insert someone's name, go, every time that a former colleague gets a promotion or a new position. Why is that?
So I'm a big believer in there needs to be more good marketing out there. You know, there's a lot of garbage in marketing. A lot of people accept things that aren't to the standards that I wish we would. And the colleagues that I have from my past, I'm very proud that I've got a lot of really good marketers and a lot of really good leaders that I've had the honor to work with. So I want good marketers in good positions so they can build more good marketing. It's for the sake of the industry, as far as I'm concerned.
All right. So you're cheering them on, your former colleagues, when they have big successes. Love that. And I like sort of the more noble cause of marketing. What do you say to people out there? Well, Ben, marketing is kind of slimy. You're just trying to make people buy stuff.
Yeah, I think human beings are weird. We have relationships with inanimate objects, restaurants and retail products and watches and clothing labels and all this stuff. It's really strange. Humans like create this bond with inanimate things that in theory make their life better, make them feel better about themselves, whatever. And I think our job as marketers is to take good things in the world, good products, good services, and create those relationships. So certainly you could see that as an opportunity to sell something. Without question, that's the end result from a business's perspective. But I think there's a lot of great products out there. We live in a time where you can get really good stuff. You can have really good services. You can have really good relationships. The Nike shoes, the Vans shoes I own, the watches I own, the car I drive, they make my life better. So I think good marketing creates those relationships. I don't think that's slimy at all. I do think it's slimy if you're trying to sell a product that's not worth buying. I also think it's slimy if you are doing it in ways that feel manipulative or just are talking about the benefits of that product. Create the relationship. That's the cool thing that marketers get to do, is create that strange relationship between an inanimate object and people.
I've never heard marketing put quite that way, but I like it. Relationship marketing. And yes, a relationship with an object is something that I think it's important that we acknowledge that's what it is. Yeah. Like we have a relationship with money, like we have with people. And that can be a healthy relationship or a not so healthy relationship, depending on what it is. Like I like peanut M&Ms, and some would say that's not a positive relationship.
Probably depends on the quantity of peanut M&Ms, but that's a great example, right? Chocolate is super commoditized, right? You can buy chocolate from 1,000 different companies, 1,000 different manufacturers, packaged in 1,000 different ways. But what M&M did was they created this interesting relationship where early on it was a functional relationship. It's not going to melt in your hand. That was the big campaign that kicked it off, if I recall. And then you got to
in your mouth, not in your hand.
Yep. That's right. And then you got these characters that were involved that created sort of this fun connection between the product. So when you pop a peanut M&M in your mouth, I would argue, yeah, you're experiencing the function of that, the taste of it, all that. But actually, what's happening is like that relationship is manifesting in your brain, like the connection you have with the fun of that product, with the experiences you've had around that product, they matter. It's,
Hmm.
you know, at Wendy's, we used to talk all the time about the Frosty matters because you had one with your grandma when you were a kid, not because of the way
That's
it
right.
tastes, even though that's important. So at the end of the day, that deeper thing, that
Hmm.
deeper emotional connection you have with that product or that service or that experience is really what connects you to the brand. That's what marketing is all about,
Hmm.
is building that relationship.
That's cool because you really hit the nail on the head with the Frosty.
How it
Uh,
works.
my mom and I getting the Frosty at Wendy's, she introduced me to that. My life's never been the same. Now my daughter loves it. And we can say, I know what Frosty is like peanut M&Ms, right? All in moderation. So the businesses you're in, moderation is important in the fast food business. How do you think about that as a marketing leader? Yes, we want you to eat lots of pizza, but not too much pizza. We want you to eat a lot of Potbelly sandwiches, maybe a little bit healthier. Frosties, we're walking the line here.
Yeah, yeah.
How do you think about marketing, ethics, health, tastiness, relationship, how it all's kind of swirling together here, and calorie intake?
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, we're not going to be anybody's parent and tell them what they can and can't do. So that's up to you, what you put in your body and how often you do so. Having said that, life would not be awesome if you couldn't have your morning coffee. It wouldn't be awesome if you couldn't have that frosty at the, on a Thursday after you've had a rough Wednesday, right? Or a rough Thursday during the day. So our point of view is
Okay.
all this stuff should be treated as not necessarily a treat, but as a thing that makes your life a little sweeter, a little better, but not necessarily your most people don't eat fast food 6 days a week. They don't, and they shouldn't. They shouldn't eat any you shouldn't eat anything 6 days a week, really, maybe broccoli, and that's about it. So my view is personally, these things do make life better. There's nothing wrong with a handful of peanut M&Ms once a day at 3 o'clock that makes you get that boost at the end of the day. There's nothing wrong with having that coffee in the morning. You just have to make those choices of what's worth it in your life and how much do you apply that. But I'd argue that's true with absolutely everything in your life, not just food. At the end of the day, if you buy too many cars, it's going to financially ruin you. If you buy too many shiny things that you like, it's going to ruin you. If you have 80 Louis Vuitton whatevers, it might ruin you financially. But having that one thing that you look down at your wrist or carrying or to put the key in and turn on the car that just puts that smile across your face, that little touch.
Hmm.
It's like a little bit of salt or a little bit of sugar in something that just makes it that much better, improves your life. So I think you have to find the balance for yourself. And at the end of the day, make it so your life is worth living. Don't live your life on pure broccoli. That's pretty terrible in my point of view.
Yeah, we need broccoli, but we also need, you got to mix it up a little bit here. We can't
There's
just
nothing
overdo
wrong with a
broccoli.
piece of cake once a week after you've had broccoli 3 days,
All right.
right? That's okay.
So you've worked for some storied brands and still are working with storied brands, of course. Think back to one of those times where, you like a specific campaign that really hit and really drove that specific role, that drove a powerful relationship between the brand and your customers and share a little bit of insight with us.
Yeah, so I'll go back to the Wendy's days just because that stuff is really well known and been documented for years and years and years now. Early on when we started there and the team was built there around digital social, which I got the pleasure to build and grow that presence and define sort of the brand from a digital social perspective years back. Fast food in general was seen as a bit of the enemy. A lot of the up and comers, the Chipotle's of the world, the Five Guys of the world, the sort of newer generation of fast casual or fast food was sort of taking the attention away from a lot of fast food stuff. Um, we got to differentiate by challenging the industry by saying, and this is going back to the where's the beef days. It was just pulling that forward and saying, what's a modern version of challenging the industry to be better and challenging people to ask more
Mm.
of the treats they have in their life, things like having a baconator or having a frosty or whatever it is. So what we got to do was reinvent sort of the positioning around challenging the industry. And we did that through social. We did that by challenging Burger King because they were freezing burger patties instead of bringing in fresh beef. We got that by challenging McDonald's from the kind of commoditization that they created in fast food. So it was really exciting to see people embrace a legacy brand, a brand that had been around for decades at that point, actually challenging the industry to be better and challenging the competitive set to be better and to have higher standards. And that led to sort of this snarky view of Wendy's, the snarky personality of Wendy's in social that resonated. And again, think about a brand that's been around for decades and was sort of lost its mojo a bit, was able to do that and recapture the enthusiasm around the brand. So I think that's the biggest win, at least early on in my career, that I had that I'm very proud of. The fact that
So
that brand has maintained that.
shifting Wendy's to a snarky, like snarky Wendy's.
Yeah.
So what on digital, like describe something on digital that came out that really embraced the snarkiness of
Yeah.
the.
So a good example was we got in fights with other brands on Twitter every day. Fights. I mean, like knockdown, drag out fights with other brands, challenging everyone to do better.
Cool.
There was a back and forth that was pretty early on in the process with Burger King, where someone basically pushed us and said they like Burger King better on Twitter, and that happens all the time, right? If you're a social media
Sure.
manager, you see that every single day. Challenged us and basically we pushed back and said, well, we don't freeze our beef. The reason our stuff tastes better is because we do the right things to make it better. Burger King comes back with a hit, we come back with another hit saying, hey, you can use that stuff as a hockey puck if you want, but if you want to eat a good burger, you gotta do it this way. There's hundreds of examples of that where the team was able to, because they were empowered properly, because we had a clear positioning, because we had a mandate to challenge the industry and be a brand that's willing to kind of fight the good fight for what we
Oof.
thought was the progress of the burger kind of world, that led to these moments that ended up on the homepage of Reddit, ended up on in headlines. Anderson Cooper covered our back and forth with McDonald's and with Burger King and with others. It made national news in many cases, and it led to us doing a lot of fun things. Like a big moment that the team is very proud of was we had, not necessarily related to burgers, but we had a kid reach out at like 10 o'clock at night and say I'd do anything for nuggets right now. And this led to a back and forth that got the kid on Ellen. So he was on Ellen DeGeneres talking about how he got nugs for life. He got unlimited nuggets from Wendy's for a period of time. That was because just he wanted this thing and he liked the nuggets at Wendy's better than McDonald's and better than other places. So we played along and were willing to challenge the whole industry and do things for our fans that I think others were unwilling to do back at that time. Now, a lot of the industry has shifted that direction because it worked so well, but very proud of that. Very proud that the team was able to do something without spending a fortune. This wasn't $100 million campaign that led to this functional change, even though that's a way to do it too. It was literally us just making a decision to be different than everyone else and to embrace a position and to stick by that position and then empower our team to actually execute it. And that led to the brand totally changing its positioning and then ultimately the outcomes for the business.
So I'm trying to imagine the Twitter food fight between like Burger King and Wendy's going on. Was it the actual brand Twitter profiles going back and okay,
Totally
that's
was. I mean, it got to
that's
the
a
point
new.
where I hired comics that their job was to roast people. And Wendy's they ultimately did like roast days where it was just fans, people would hit up Wendy's and other brands did it too. Dozens of brands did it. They hit up Wendy's with, roast me, and then we'd pick it apart and say, this is how you could be better in some funny way with literally roast comics writing the content. So
Oh,
it's a
so
very different.
genius.
It worked great. It worked
It,
great. It still works great. They
so I'm
still do
trying to
it today.
imagine. So take me back, if you can remember back to that first staff meeting when you're like, y'all, we have got to change this up at Wendy's. This brand is beloved, but it's really like we're missing the boat here.
No.
We're going to be snarky Wendy's.
Yeah. So
What,
so
what happened? What'd you
yeah,
tell
it
them?
was it was absolutely a process. It took some time, But the reason I was brought in, the reason our new CEO came in and he wanted to kind of transform the brand and make it relevant again. His view was digital was a means to potentially do that, which is why he hired me, and that led to me building out the team. But fundamentally, we did our homework and we worked with a lot of great partners like VML out of Kansas City and Character Camp, which is a great group of folks that help define a brand. And we said, okay, well, what made this brand different and noticeable when it first came onto the scene? And I think that's a huge key for most brands. You've got to figure out what made people build that relationship with you, fall in love with you early
Mhm.
on. What was that thing
Yep.
that then you could leverage over and over and over as a brand? Because that's what a brand is. It's consistency and personality and execution and attitude, right? And what really was the foundation of that for Wendy's was Where's the Beef? That was the initial moment back in the
Yep.
80s. I mean, I read about it in college
Yeah.
of
I remember as a kid. Yeah.
yeah,
Where's
so
the
this
beef?
was literally a brand that challenged other brands on live TV for the first time. And in fact,
Mhm.
got in a little trouble for it at the time, even though it became a cultural phenomenon. This idea that you can push forward and say others need to step up their game. So we went back to Where's the Beef and said, what's the modern iteration of Dave Thomas in his early years and Where's the Beef as a campaign? Because Dave, when he first
Hmm.
started coming on TV, was challenging everyone else, saying, why would you go anywhere else? Kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Everybody else's hamburgers, the meat is shrinking,
That's
and you
exactly
come to
right.
Wendy's and we're not doing that.
That's exactly right.
That
He
lady is
was
coming on there like, where's the beef? Like, I'm not eating this
exactly
burger.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. And Dave did the same thing. Dave would come on commercials. Dave was the founder of the brand, obviously Dave Thomas, and
Mhm.
was the primary spokesperson for decades for the brand. And it was all about challenging the industry to be better. And they got away from that over the years. So as you got to the early 2000s and competitors started coming in, it became more about limited time offers and
Mhm.
other messages, but it really wasn't about challenging the industry again. So we said, how do we bring that back in a modern context? How do you do that in a world where Facebook is now starting to grow and become a significant player, early 2000s, 2010s? How do you do that in a world where Twitter and other social platforms are where these conversations occur now? And that's exactly what led to us experimenting with being this snarky differentiated brand that fundamentally challenges the industry to be better and is willing to sound like a person. That was the other, I think, big change. And others had started down that direction. So I can't say Wendy's began that, but we were one of the first, not the first, one of the first brands to actually sound like a human being, to let our people express a human side to
Mhm.
this giant corporation that embodied that mentality of challenging the industry. So that really was a breakthrough moment, but it took a while. It took over a year of us doing that and running a bunch of campaigns. I mean, we had Boys to Men and Nick Lachey sing about how much they loved our sandwiches and challenge the industry to make sandwiches like ours. Nobody was doing that stuff in the 2010s. That was off the radar for most brands because they felt like it was too off the course of just show a big picture of a sandwich and talk about a price. That's what you do. That's what sells this stuff. And the truth was, it was commoditized at that point. Everyone was doing that. So it was completely undifferentiated.
So putting the person or a personality behind the brand sounds like it was the key in that. And you were able to, because it wasn't just one person operating Twitter, it was a group of, it sounds like your team, some comics, people, but you had to say, hey, this is who we are, this is who we're trying to embody. And they were able to sort of get in that frame of mind. I mean, that is really impressive because a lot of times the company brand is a soulless, faceless entity, and you guys are working like hell to say, no, 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 we there is a person behind this.
Exactly.
How does this translate to AI today? Because right now there are a lot of brands that are relying on AI, and it seems like they're trying to maybe leverage it in a similar way, but I don't, do you think a computer can become a a person behind the brand, like a machine operated entity, or do you think the humans still got to be at the helm of the
Yeah,
brand?
I think today humans absolutely still have to be at the helm. What I've found, and this is it's very early days here, right? We're seeing some amazing stuff. So I think the future is wide open for what could happen. But today, AI is good at kind of packaging what's already out there and spinning it slightly differently. but it's not really good at having a completely differentiated point of view. It's not as creative and it's not as it's not as witty. It's not as relatable. I think you still have, I can't remember what the actual term is, but you still have that thing where you look at a generated face and you're like, something's just a little off here. And I would argue that's
I get it.
on everything that comes out from pure AI. Now, I think it's an excellent tool and from a standpoint of a starting point. So that's what my teams are using a lot. They're using AI as a starting point. It's a way to consolidate, it's a way to gather thoughts, it's a
Mhm.
way to build a framework for something, but then you have to have a human come
Hmm.
in and basically make it human. So it's the research, it's the homework, it's the framework. But to me, it's not ready yet to be the personality. And part of me doesn't want it to ever become the personality because I think that's what makes us special is we don't have that sort of uncanny, I think it's uncanny valley might be the term that I've heard used, is that strange difference
Yeah.
between a generated thing and something that is truly human made. So I don't think it's ready yet. I think it's a good tool to get started, but not necessarily the end application yet. I might change my mind in 3 years, but today I don't think it's quite ready yet.
Yeah. Things are evolving very quickly. Who knows where this thing will end? Thinking back to your experience at Papa John's and at Potbelly also, did you take a similar relationship brand approach? And if so, how did it differ from the food fight Twitter approach with Wendy's and the snarky style and from those other two well-known brands?
Yeah, so fundamentally, I don't think you can take the same approach at any brand. I think you have to go back to what I
Hmm.
sort of started with in sort of the origin of what we did at Wendy's. You have to decide what is the thing that differentiates you, what creates that relationship that is
Hmm.
valuable to the end user of the product or the consumer you're targeting. So at Papa John's and Papa, the problems were different, right? But at Papa John's, the issue fundamentally was the the way the brand was going to market was a bit about out of touch. It was more about dealing and more about a particular spokesperson, the founder, John, and that didn't feel appropriate for where we were headed. So we started to shift away from a lot of heavy sports relationships, even though those can be very useful. We started to shift away from just using John as a primary spokesperson. And as we began to do that, we started to see benefit from that. Now, I was only there a short time. I wasn't there at Papa John's a long time. So the team picked up that work and made it even better, I would argue, moving into the pandemic where it grew like a weed, in part because of the business model, but also because I think they embraced what it could be as a brand. It became more about better products. It became more about sourcing. It became more about limited time offers, frankly, that caught
Hmm.
people's interest. At Potbelly, the problem was actually even more different than the other two. Potbelly, we learned through some experimentation, it was really hard for new users, new customers to actually understand that brand. And if you
Hmm.
Potbelly, it's about 500 locations and is based in Chicago and heavy urban scenarios. You walk in and it was very overwhelming. The experience, it had
Hmm.
5 menu boards, the products were complicated, the process to make the products was complicated, the process to order. And what people were used to in that space was Subway, which was very simple. Subway is a very simple experience, a very simple
Hmm.
product. So we had to simplify the experience and build out the tools like the loyalty system that allowed people to build a relationship with the brand. So it was
Hmm.
more about differentiating us from folks like Subway by actually going deep with users and with customers in places like digital and social and loyalty specifically. So I do think you have
Interesting.
to
Okay.
pick the tools and the approach that's appropriate for your brand to get it to grow. And
Hmm.
assuming that every brand has the same problems, I think is a huge mistake. Sometimes
Hmm.
you need awareness, sometimes you need a deeper relationship, sometimes you need tools for advocacy or word of mouth, sometimes you need tools to make the brand easier to use. And those unlocks are a huge shift in how you actually deal with your customers and then ultimately what your business outcomes look like.
Yeah, it sounds like you've got to go deep, and that's your process. Go deep, really understand what makes it special, and then the word that comes to mind for me is just your ability to prioritize because there's so many options in marketing with the digital space opening up so much. You could just pick anything And you chose totally different tools for each one of those winners that you worked with,
That's
based
exactly
upon
right.
that.
And the clients we work with right now at GroundTruth is a media platform, but we're very open in the discussion we have with our clients to say,
Hmm.
hey, we solve a specific issue that you might have, a problem you might have. We can't solve every problem. If you don't know what your brand is and what your point of differentiation is, we're not going to solve that for you. You need to go to a creative agency or you need to go to a partner that
Yeah.
does the homework for you to figure out that issue. But if you define your issue as people love my message, they love my product, my experience is good, people just aren't showing up as often as they should, that's when you come to us
Hmm.
because we can spread that message to the right people at the right time and then prove that they showed up. And that's an unlock
Okay.
for people. And that's actually why I joined the company because fundamentally I saw a lot of brands with that issue that they were a great brand. I mean, how many products have you told people that you need to try this, but you never hear about them? Like you have no sense of they're like, what the hell is that? Like, what even
Yeah.
is that thing you're
Yeah.
telling me I should try? And it's
Mhm.
because I think in that case, that's a clear illustration of you have an issue with actually the message distribution, getting to the right people at the right time with the right frequency, and then proving, and so you can double down on what's working, that it's actually resulting in the traffic you need as a retailer or a restaurant. So, so now I'm in more of a specific niche because I feel like that's one of the biggest problems that exist among brands is they just don't know how to distribute their message appropriately and then prove that message is effective and resulting in a business growth. But at the end of the day, you have to define your problem and have enough evidence and testing to know that problem is solvable for your brand. Potbelly is an example. My issue wasn't message distribution at first. It's becoming that today for that brand because they fixed the other things. But at the end of the day, if that's your issue, you need to find the partners that can solve your
Yeah.
problem, whatever your fundamental problem is that's
Yeah. It's
keeping
so
people from
good for
coming.
people to think about that. One, defining what you probably got a million, you got a lot of problems, but what is the biggest one holding your company back? And then who are the external people or entities that can help you?
Yeah,
Because a lot of times people will say, well, so and so is my friend. I'm going to use their company, but maybe they're helping them solve a problem that's not the top thing. And then
exactly.
you're kind of misguided in that way and you're not going to accomplish your goals. So I think having that clarity first. I mean, so many great examples in this. And one thing I got to ask you about though on your bookshelf is I see the 4 Hour Work Week up there by Tim Ferriss, which I love that book. And it's just incredible. It's been around a while. It seems like there is some sort of connection between the 4 hour work week mindset and how you approach things.
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of books up there that are about prioritization, about choosing the problem you want to solve and working hard on that problem,
Yeah.
because then it leads you to accomplishing a lot more in a lot less time. And frankly, it allows you the freedom to be able to experiment with other things. So I'm a
Mm.
huge believer in prioritization. We don't have 25 problems to solve. Everybody says, well, these are my 10 priorities. Priorities, you have 10 priorities. It's just a fact. So I do really think you have to be specific and targeted on what you're working on. And sometimes that's not the problem. You think it is, you work on it for a while, and it's not the problem. And you can't get into this
Yeah.
sunk cost fallacy where you say, well, we got to keep working on that problem because we put so much time and effort in. That's not how it works. You got to do what works. You got to do what
Yeah.
makes the business do what the business needs to do to be successful. So yeah, I mean, a lot of what I communicate to my teams and ultimately on the boards I sit on and all that is you got to be specific. You got to figure out what is the unlock to your issue.
Mhm.
And once you discover what it is, bet on it until it stops working and then move on to the next problem. But
Mm.
don't think you're going to solve every problem. And it doesn't matter the size of your organization. Wendy's is huge. Papa John's is huge. These are companies with I had budgets that were in the hundreds of millions of dollars per year at both of those companies. And at the end of the day, your temptation is to try everything and just cut it up and say, well, we'll do 10% here and 4% there and 6%. And what ends up happening is nothing makes enough progress that it actually affects the business. You got to make bigger bets on the problems that are significant in the business. Give them enough time to see if it actually results in the change you're looking for. And when it doesn't, you have to be willing to take the hit on the chin and say, we tried this, it didn't accomplish what we were hoping it would. So we're moving on to this next problem because this next problem we think is the unlock that the first one wasn't able to realize.
Yeah. So good to think about. It's so practical from allocating your budget and what you're going to try. There's a tendency to spread it out. I'm going to place 10 bets, but maybe that's keeping you from putting the resources behind the ones that are much more likely to pay off.
Yeah,
And so maybe it's putting bigger budget allocations into certain things, but then being willing to pivot if you're not seeing it.
exactly. And you do start with a lot of bets because you need to see what has potential. So the beginning step is a bunch of little things, but nothing is significant. And you're holding essentially the reserve of your resources to wait to find the one thing, what the thing is
Mhm,
that has the
mhm.
most potential. So fundamentally, I'm not saying you shouldn't try to figure out what's going on and if your problem is a real problem. But you got to move pretty quickly to a big enough bet that you can actually realize a change in the business. Because otherwise, what ends up happening is people sit in jobs for 3, 4, 5, 6 years and they only see like inches of growth because there's something in that mix that's working. They just don't know what it is. They're afraid. They get scared to change anything that's causing any sort of growth or any sort of loss of revenue or whatever the offset is, rather than saying, okay, well, let's make a bigger bet on the thing that we have the most confidence is going to drive results. And you got to lean on the data for that. You got to lean on customer research for that. You got to do enough tests early to learn what the bets you should be making are, and then go deep. That's what
Yeah.
you got to do. You got to take some risk, and that's scary. That's really scary.
Well, if you want to go to Vegas, go with Brendan. He probably has something figured out there in terms of how to do that. Have you won big in Vegas before?
I'm an ROI guy, and you walk into some of those buildings and you see who's getting the money. I don't do bets like
All
that.
right.
So
All right, never mind.
I'm
Don't go with
actually not a
Brandon.
Vegas guy. I'm much more of a bet on the right mutual funds kind of guy
Okay, all
because I
right.
see what works and I bet on ROI.
Duly noted. All right. So when I was going through your background, I went back in the archives to your first job. Tell us about that first job and how that seemed to be, I guess you may not have known where your career was going to go, but it seemed very fortuitous what happened there.
Yeah. So I started actually at an arena in college. So I started working in an arena doing PR and things like that. And what I learned there, and that quickly led to an agency job, which I'll talk about next for a second. But that arena job, you were make or break on whether or not you sold out the second night of Toby Keith. First night always sold out. The second
Hmm.
night was the big deal. That's the problem that you might not sell
Hmm.
out second night. So what I learned there was you had to find mechanisms to build on what works very quickly. So a good example there is this is back in the 90s, so forever ago for most people, or even before most people are born, who are probably listening to this. But back in the 90s, we learned very quickly that news coverage of the first night's event made the second event sell out. Whether or not
Yeah.
someone came the second night was all about whether or not it was expressed to people. In today's terms, that would be like in social media expression of interest in something, but it was news coverage. It was the 11 o'clock news, the 10 o'clock news had to cover your event. And the problem back in the 90s was this is before digital was a thing, in serious digital, anyways. So people would take a videotape of the awesome event from Toby Keith or Bruce Springsteen or Nine Inch Nails or whatever the thing was, and they would try to run it down to the TV station with edited as best they could and
Hmm.
see if they would get coverage. And they would bring it down at like 10:50 p.m. to try to make it on the 11 o'clock news. That was near impossible. It
Hmm.
almost never happened. And this was the early days of digital social, and we just got internet, like we had America Online, I think, dial up at our office. And
AOL.
that's
Yes.
right. And what we did was we were one of the first to digitally capture the event, cut it up in digital format, and actually email over an FTP link to the news stations. And they would get it at like in the first half hour of the concert. So by 9:30, they'd have it.
No. You're
This
capturing
first
the first part. So there's still more to run.
That's right. So we would make the 10 o'clock and the 11 o'clock news. And that got to the point where
The
we started
concert's still going on. And they're like, wow, we've already
right.
got a highlight.
And we're getting coverage. So
Yeah.
we'd start seeing traffic for the second night. And we started repeating kind of that mentality. We started actually digitally broadcasting our minor league hockey team games where you could listen to it anywhere in the world and you could pick up on the action for a series of 3 games on the first night and listen to it live because we didn't have a radio contract. We were
Mm.
using these early digital tools to distribute the content in a way that was very accessible and usable by media sources, by people pre-social days to catch attention. That led to an agency job that ultimately at that agency, we started doing something very similar. And it was mostly B2B at the time, but we were able to actually broadcast
Mm.
things in real time, things like virtual webinars back in before YouTube existed, where someone could see a new product, they could see how it's used, they could experience it, they could ask questions of the engineers using the product. And actually that digital attention that we were able to generate that was much more efficient, much quicker, didn't require production times that were crazy, didn't require distribution that was laborious and difficult to actually consume and rebroadcast for people, led to actually them looking at me for Wendy's. Because back in the 2010s, not a lot of big brands were using those digital mechanisms of communication. So it was all about using the tools available to you for easy distribution of your messaging to the right people at the right time. So you had
Mm.
the intended outcomes, which is now on steroids for everyone. But back in the day, that was new.
That is cool.
Yeah,
Because you could see your formula emerging. Well, hey, we need to sell out the second night of Toby Keith. What's our problem? Well,
yeah,
we just sell more tickets. Okay. Well, what drives that? And then understanding, hey, it's the news, and we can even do it better because we can make the news twice.
that's exactly
The
right.
concert does
Exactly
not have
right.
to be over for us to do it, and we don't have to have a physical videotape that we cut up to take down there. We can use these tools to accelerate it.
Exactly right. And
And I
again,
could,
the traditional means, the traditional media. So all the stuff you run leading up to the first night of Toby Keith, that's sold out the first night. So you still use traditional media,
yeah,
but it doesn't sell the second night necessarily.
yeah.
So finding the specific problem and then defining the tools that are available to you, even if they're a little bleeding edge, that ultimately can let you solve that problem, I think is the game changer.
Brennan, this has been fun and educational and let us inside the mind of a mad scientist marketer. But really doing cool stuff and so many fun stories. And honestly, only asked probably 25% of the questions that I intended to ask. So we have to do this again sometime. What's your parting thought for our listeners today?
Yeah, I think it is really important to define that problem early so you know what to test.
Hmm.
Then you got to be brave. You got to bet on the things that you have the most confidence will be successful. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of noise in marketing. You have to have high standards on how you bet on those things, how you put them into market. They have to be different. They have to be easily accessible. So use the tools at your disposal to solve your problem and focus on that problem. So fundamentally you can actually experience serious growth instead of this little incremental garbage that ultimately becomes a rounding error and you don't end up producing great work. So focus on the problem and make brave big bets once you
All
figure it out.
right. Brave big bets. Thanks, Brennan.
No problem. See you, Ben.